Hi, everybody. On today's Therapy Talks podcast, we have Dr. Menije from Los Angeles. She is a perfectionism specialist, OCD and addictions psychotherapist. And on today's show, we really highlight perfectionism and the inner critic. So we talk about having realistic and flexible expectations about ourselves, how we respond to our mistakes, how we observe our thoughts and identify them. We also talk about the lesser known symptoms of perfectionism, like people pleasing or procrastination. And we combat that with the motto progress over perfection. And we talk about seeking approval. So I hope you join us on today's show. It's going to be a really good one. So, Dr. Menije, you're in LA. Tell us about some of the specialties that you work in. I was reading a bit about you, some OCD, addictions, perfectionism. Those are hot topics. They are fascinating. We are so excited to learn a little bit more about you and those types of things, and even your online learning platform about perfectionism, Perfectionism University. So yeah, tell us a little bit about you. Obviously, being from Turkey, being from Istanbul, coming over at 15, how did you get to be a therapist? And then where are you at now?
So I actually like my story of becoming a therapist because I know a lot of times people feel the pressure to figure out what they're going to do with their lives. And I remember I went to UC San Diego and I was undeclared, and then I took a psychology 101 course and thought to myself, I can learn psychology and study this topic for the next 4 years. And then I took just baby steps. So it started with just the interest in studying psychology, and then I got involved with working with kids with autism, and then I went into graduate school. And through meeting different friends and being introduced to different opportunities, I started doing my postgraduate in a rehab facility, non-12-step drug and alcohol treatment facility, and I was there for 5 years working with individuals who have addiction and want to be in recovery. And then in 2017, after I had my daughter, it was a time for me to have my own private practice here in Los Angeles. So I specifically work with adults individually, or I do some couples work. And I guess to pause that for a second, so on a personal level, it was in my late 20s. I'm sure you know of this book and love it as much as I do. I read Dr. Brené Brown's Gifts of Imperfections.
Yes,
And
very good.
it was so amazing. And I found out the name with what I was struggling with behind my anxiety and behind my tendency to like always, worry if I'm hurting someone's feeling or worrying if I'm doing enough, was this underlying feeling like, am I good enough?
Mm-hmm.
And this pursuit of perfectionism. So just to kind of, again, go from that professional to a personal journey that I was on, I started to unpack my life story, and I started to understand how coming in here 2 weeks before your 15th birthday, the way I one time explained it to my therapist is felt like, as young adults, you go to parties and imagine you're walking into a social gathering and there's all these groups of people, everybody's already mingling and you're just trying to find your place. Right. That's how it really felt coming into the United States, to a new country.
Right.
And so I started to unpack my pursuit of perfectionism and understanding my personal journey. I started to then see perfectionism in my clients. And I know this happens to many therapists. Once we start to understand things from a human perspective and human experience, we see it in others, that same suffering in other human beings.
Right.
And so coming back to, again, I work with addiction. I started my private practice, and then that's how I started working, also specializing in obsessive compulsive disorder. And again, research, you see that perfectionism plays a role in the development and maintenance of these mental health issues, whether it is eating disorder, ADHD, addiction, OCD, depression, and anxiety disorders. You inevitably see that, again, either perfectionism was part of what had started some of these issues, or it's what kept it, or how people turn to perfectionism as a coping skills, right? If they're struggling with depression, if they're struggling with anxiety, they turn to perfectionism to mask those sufferings. And that's where I think it was personal and professionally, it was really a place that I saw perfectionism as a passion of mine to unpack and debunk any chance I get.
Oh, I love that, because it is so true. Often therapists get that clinical rap of very professional. You learn about it, you study it, you research it, you work in it. But for most of us, we have a personal side to that too, that we really resonate and are drawn towards, and that we have to do the work in ourselves, that we wrestle through. We have to unpack in our own therapy. Often behind every good therapist is often a good therapist. And just really honing those skills, like out of our deepest hurts sometimes come our most effective impact. And so I love how honest and real you are, because that, in my opinion, that's what makes the best therapists. And I love that book. That's one of my favorite books I've probably ever read. I was a former very high level athlete. I came from a very high athletic family, orthopedic surgeon family, very like high achieving. And that's really how I describe myself all the time. And I think that, if we boil it down, and I supervise at universities and all that. And when I look at those high achieving students or the business CEOs or those pro athletes, even them, it's like a 15, 14-year-old kid walking into a room. People are kind of on the surface, it looks like they knew who they are. They're mingling, or at least they're functioning. And deep down, we all have these, where do I belong? And am I good enough? And oftentimes that's what I really see in people. And I've felt it myself as well, for sure, too, is, am I good enough? Am I blank enough? And really, I see how that can, perpetuate or just really mold alongside of perfectionism. So when you're working with someone, what are the maybe things that you look for? Like, would they come in and say, oh, I'm really struggling with perfectionism or perfectionistic tendencies? Or how do you know if it's that, or just you're a high achieving individual?
Yes. So as you know, people come to therapy often complaining for mood disturbances, right? They're feeling high anxiety, they're feeling intense sad mood, or they're having relationship problems, or they have sleep problems. So, now more than I think about 5 years ago, when I was first looking at perfectionism in the mental health experiences, people were not knocking at my door saying, I struggle with perfectionism. Now I do get that a little bit, maybe because of social media as well. I do get people saying, I think I struggle with perfectionism. But to answer your question, I think when we do, to understand the role of perfectionism, there are kind of two things. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, I look at thoughts and actions, because with perfectionism, there is one of the core definition of perfectionism is having unrealistically high expectations of yourself that is never attainable. So there's, again, those has to be the pieces of perfectionism. And one of the myths around perfectionism is equating that to doing my best or just trying to be excellent. And one of the ways that I always explain to people the difference between perfectionism and doing my best is that how I respond to mistakes. So again, defining or assessing for evaluating for perfectionism, I also ask people how they think about or respond to mistakes they make, flaws they have, or hiccups that they experience, shortcomings they experience. As Carol Dweck's research on mindset, we have growth mindset people, and then we have fixed mindset people. And I've actually done a post about this too, how when I was reading that book, when everything she says about fixed mindset, I'm like, you're describing a perfectionist.
Yeah.
So coming back to how we assess and evaluate perfectionism in people, we want to look at their expectations of themselves. And we want to see whether that's realistic or unrealistic, whether they're flexible or rigid with their expectations of themselves, and how they tolerate mistakes. So when somebody who is in a healthier place of doing their best, for example, here I am meeting with you today, and I have every intention to do my best here and share my thoughts with you to the best of my abilities, but there's somewhere in my mind, I know I'm going to make mistakes. There is somewhere in me, my self-awareness, that I know I am going to forget to say something and our call is going to end. And I'm like, oh, I should have said this great idea. And, or I am going to lose my train of thought in the middle of a sentence and try to cover it up so your audience can tell. So you see, I think that is the difference between being a perfectionist versus overcoming perfectionism, which, believe me, it's always a work in progress. But again, perfectionists have unrealistic expectations of themselves. They're very rigid. They always want to do better. So it's never good enough. I know that's a very, buzzword right now, but it's literally a thought of a perfectionist that I did this great. And then I have a thought that says, well, if you were really good, you could replicate that good result.
Right.
And if you were really good, you would do it faster next time.
Right.
Or if you were really good, you would do it with less help next time. So there's always like, can you do it better next time, whether you're doing it faster? And when I do workshop, I got really positive feedback about that from people saying that they really don't know or didn't know so well the perfectionism and the pace, the pressure to do things really fast or to do things quickly. So those are a few things I pause there for a second.
Oh, that's so good. And just even as you were saying that, when that voice, or do you ever recommend like to try to name that voice? I know Brene Brown, that's one of her strategies. I love that one. Try to separate it from yourself, like call it a name, the perfectionism, the inner critic, Nancy, like something like that. Do you ever recommend a strategy like that?
I do. And one way I describe that strategy to people is the phrase I use is self-distancing. And I love the power of self-distancing. And as mindfulness principle is about observing our thoughts, watching our thoughts. I tell my clients, especially with OCD, where they have a lot of intrusive thoughts, and there's this false belief with OCD that makes it very debilitating before people come to therapy, is that they believe I'm having this thought, it must mean something. So we really teach people, as you know, to watch their thoughts, listen to their thought as if it's a song playing in the radio. So it's this act of self-distancing and watching, observing, noticing your thoughts, and then along with that, personifying that thought and giving it a name. And maybe another tool could be understanding who spoke that thought to you in your life. Who does that belong to? Because it may not be your true voice. It could be that, I'm not obviously like, there are good teachers out there, but there might be some harsh teachers or rigid teachers, strict teachers, I should say, that maybe model that to you. So understanding who's that voice belonging to, because it must not be my true kind voice that I would speak to myself. And again, another wonderful Brené Brown tool is, what is the story I'm telling myself?
I love that. And I work out of a cognitive behavioral therapy lens a lot as well. And I just love that because it was so powerful when I was able to first separate myself from that inner critic voice, or give that person a name, that negative thought, that it wasn't me, like that it wasn't actually my true thought. And that's such a powerful question too. Who first said that, or whose voice does that sound like? And that can go in so many directions. Like you said, you work with couples, like maybe it was an ex or an argument and communication and conflict stuff. Maybe it was a family member, a caregiver, a parent, boundary work, all of that inner child type healing. I mean, you could go down so many roads from that, but I think what you're showing is that kind of impacts all of us. You don't have to be a perfectionism to have that type of, or a perfectionist to have those types of thoughts. But again, being able to differentiate rigidness, fixed, being more flexible, or I'm not defined by this, that story I tell myself, like, am I a complete failure for this? Oh, I said that, or I didn't say that. I'm playing it over and over in my head. Or, hey, I did my best. I tried something new. I'm really proud of myself. And I see that so much in the university students that we work with, young moms, like in today's age as a parent too, like you have the pressure to be a stay-at-home mom, but be a working mom all at the same time, and vice versa. Like it's just a lot. And when I work with moms, especially postpartum, wow, do I hear those, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing a good enough job. And then often it is rooted in some perfectionistic type tendencies like that. So I love those questions because they're so real. Like you could ask yourself there at work, in a meeting with a young baby, really wherever you are, you could kind of process that in your head a little bit, or wait till you get home and journal or therapy. Those are some really great tools.
And that what I would like to maybe add when you mention how perfectionism can show up in motherhood is this. I also another, I think, aspect of perfectionism, at least the way I have seen it, is that it latches onto things you value. And therefore, anytime you are pursuing or experiencing a new chapter in your life that you obviously care about because you're pursuing it, or it's like you buy a new home, it could be something like that, to a new spiritual practice you begin, or a new physical fitness goal you begin, anything new that you begin that you are pursuing because you are interested in it and you care about it, and obviously something as precious as becoming a parent, perfectionism will be right there, because it's kind of a mindset that says it must be perfect for it to have value. If I really cared, I would do it perfectly. If I really love this relationship, if I'm really want this, then I would do it perfectly, is the reason why also perfectionism shows up anytime we do something that we really care about. And we have to then again debunk or challenge and rewrite those narratives to say it doesn't have to be perfect for it to be valuable. And that my parenting is not based on how perfectly I do it. It's that saying my worth isn't measured based on my productivity. My worth as a mother is not based on how well I do every single, instant I have with my child. And I think when we start saying these out loud and really obviously enforce these ideas in our lives, I see even, with self-care, a lot of parents, a lot of moms, I think have a really hard time making time for self-care because the narrative in their head is, well, if I was a good mom, I would want to spend 24/7 with my kid. I'm like, whoever wants that, good for you. That's not
I
my
know. And then
my
I
reality.
usually, I hear that so much. And I say, okay, you could love your job, but you would never be expected to be on call 24/7, 365 days a year for literally the rest of your life. Like you would not, that's not a thing in work. Therefore, in this role of your life, you can have some breaks to come back because empty cups can't pour and you need that replenishing.
Yes.
Easier said than done.
I know. And it's interesting because logically we all would, I'm sure people listening to this will be nodding their heads. So where do we get stuck is the feelings. We feel guilty saying that. We feel uncomfortable saying that because it goes against our programming, or what, again, I'm not pointing fingers. It's not a blame game. It's just understanding that there are cultural messages, there are religious messages that says to women. And Glennon Doyle, I think her work has been so wonderful in describing this idea of like moms have to be selfless and moms have to be dedicating their lives to their kids. And that's, again, true definition of a mother. So I think we have a lot of work to do to debunk those ideas and not like, as you were saying earlier, the boundaries, like set those boundaries unapologetically.
Yeah. Yeah. Have that more balanced perspective. Like especially with that perfectionistic type thinking, it's like, I can see myself when I get in those tendencies or that comes up again or rears its ugly head. It's like, well, if I can't do it perfectly, then I'm not going to do it at all. And I can see that kind of dichotomy or that, polarizing way of thinking. And I can catch that. Like I'm a therapist. This is actually my specialty is anxiety and working in these areas. Even I struggle with that. And I eventually identify it and be like, okay, what's going on here? And maybe, work through that process and talk to someone even. But it's amazing how it rears its ugly head. And we just like you said, how you equated it before, like a song coming on the radio or on your phone, or you're listening to something, we get to change that. And I think we forget that a lot, because it's like, oh, that's on now, I just have to listen to it, and maybe I'll start to believe it. But it's like, okay, how do I change that? What are some tools? I mean, you've given quite a few, but do you have a favorite of, if that's starting to come up again, or you're feeling the pressure, like even that critical self-talk, the tone of my voice changes, the cadence of it, like it gets a little faster, more judgy tone, like things I would actually never talk to someone I genuinely love. And so, it's amazing in our own heads how that can like start to, if we can start to identify, then what do you usually, encourage to do?
As you mentioned, we first have to recognize it. And because it's normal for those thoughts, those voices to be triggered. Again, when we normalize that, perfectionism latches onto things I value. So as long as I am involved in things I love and I have a fulfilling life where I do things that I love, it is normal for perfectionism to try to trick me into thinking that you will have a sense of belonging if you do it perfectly. You will be lovable if you do it perfectly. And so first we want to, again, normalize that it will always kind of linger. I think it's always going to be in the back seat. My goal or my responsibility is not to bring it back to the driver's seat. Recognize it, as you said, like, what are my triggers? Is it when I don't get enough sleep? Is it where by the end of the day, by the end of the week, is it, what triggers it? So I think some of our coping skills has to be a response to our triggers. Because if your perfectionism or your need to be perfect or your high expectations of yourself loudest when you are not having enough sleep, let's start with healthy sleep hygiene. And another, I think as a mom, one of the best things I've learned through motherhood was creating a better morning routine. Because I've realized whenever I woke up with my daughter at the same time as my daughter, it was the worst thing I was doing for myself. So I have one child, so I had to wake up before her. And so we want to look at, again, would it be waking up before your kids so you can at least have 20 to 30 minutes to have your coffee or wash your face, change your clothes if you want to, whatever your morning routine needs to be. It doesn't have to be something fancy. It doesn't have to be green smoothies. So even just brushing your hair is good,
Right.
good enough self-care.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for people to look at what triggers their perfectionism so they have a coping skill in response to that. However, I think it's important to say that at the end of the day, one of the, I think, best armors or best tools against perfectionism is self-compassion, because we have to embrace mistakes. There is no denying that we're imperfect human beings. We mess up. We say things we don't mean. And I also tell my clients this, as you were mentioning earlier, like the more we know ourselves, I think that better guidance we give to our clients. The truth is there are going to be different parts of me. Like I always give this idea that I love to eat, but I also have some physical health goals.
Yeah.
Not a weight related, just health goals to be healthy and strong. And there's that dichotomy in myself. So there are going to be times where we're going to make choices that don't align with what we decided we were going to do. Like I was going to go to bed early, but then I watched that Netflix show. Well, it happens. How can you forgive yourself? How can you have empathy that there are different parts of you, and doesn't mean, because again, what we typically do is, like, let's take that example where the person wants to go to bed early and they find themselves staying late watching Netflix. What do they do next day? They label themselves. I'm never going to get better. I'm a lousy, indecisive, unmotivated human being. And I'm just never going to, excuse my French, get my shit together. So there's these, again, like labels we then conclude about ourselves. So self-compassion, forgiveness, self-validating that, yes, I do want to go to bed early, and that dialectical thinking, and I like to sometimes stay up late at night and watch TV. I am a great mom and I need my alone time. I love spending time with my husband, and I want to do something with my friends.
Yeah. So adding that, and like both of those things can be true about you, and they can hang in tension, not even tension, they can simultaneously be true.
Yes, it can be. So I think, again, to overcome perfectionism, or at least keep it in the back seat, we need to be self-compassionate. We need to be kind, understanding, and empathetic towards ourselves when we mess up, when we make mistakes, or things don't turn out the way we intended them to. And when we see discrepancies in our choices or our actions, bringing in that and to have more self-acceptance. One of my favorite quote is, I was just sharing this earlier today in social media, the goal is to be a whole, not perfect. The goal is to bring our strengths and weaknesses. The goal is to bring together my talents and my shortcomings.
I love self-compassion work. I think it's so powerful. I really love Dr. Neff's kind of approaches to self-compassion. Again, like the tone, talking to yourself like you would a young child. And wow, does your tone of voice change, or someone that you really care about, like envisioning their face. How would you speak to them, or what would they say to you? And actually visualizing that, like seeing them, that remembering an embrace or a hug, their tone of voice changes, their word choices change. What else do you recommend, like in terms of self-compassion? One, I guess, what does that look like in real life, and how can our listeners practice it?
So depending, like you mentioned, depending on where you are in the practice of self-compassion, if it's your first time understanding it, Dr. Kristen Neff's book is to go. She has a new book, so I would recommend for people to actually read her first one. I think it's called Power of Self-Compassion, or Self-Compassion, Power of Being Kind to Yourself. So I think you first want to understand what self-compassion is, because self-compassion is more than, according to Dr. Neff's model, it's more than just being nice to yourself. It's also actually self-validating that in this moment, I'm having a hard time. So she really highlights the value of being mindful of our emotional state and being willing to say, and that goes back to, again, these additional work some people might need to do, because if you grew up in a family environment where emotions weren't expressed openly or welcomed. I just was working with somebody earlier this week where, these are adult people that genuinely have a hard time labeling emotions more than happy, sad, and angry. And we use emotion wheel. Just Google.
Yes,
I think
I love that. That's what I use too. Yep.
Yeah, just, if you Google emotion wheel, you see there's a long list of words that we really want to expand on as we are trying to be more self-aware and self-compassionate, is to be able to say, I am feeling hurt, or I'm feeling left out. I am feeling abandoned, neglected, insecure, and even jealous. I tell my clients all the time, feeling jealous is not again, quote unquote, bad emotion. So I think to expand your self-compassion practice would require you to identify your feelings and be willing to accept them as they are. So my to-go phrase, just to keep it practical and easy, it's okay to feel this way.
Yeah, it's
That's
okay
all.
to feel this way.
It doesn't have to be complicated phrase.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel this way. Again, to go back to Dr. Neff's model, then we also want to remind ourselves that other people would feel this way, that we're not alone in our suffering. Because with perfectionism and the inner critic, one of the other common phrases is, something is wrong with me. I am messing this up. And I'm so guilty of this because my daughter and I still some days have a hard sleep journey. Sleep training her has been difficult. And I had many days, no matter how well I know these stuff, I still had thoughts cross my mind where all my friends on Instagram, they're doing great. There's something wrong with me. I am just not getting this. And so we have to remind ourselves, part of self-compassion is that you're not alone in your suffering, that this suffering is not only happening to you.
Yeah.
That other people
That's
have
so
the same
true.
problem.
Right. Yeah. And I often, like, my inner critic likes to use big words like that. Like, everybody else has it figured out. Nobody else is struggling with this. And that's probably a good indicator, then, kind of the internal alarm system. Hey, let's pause. Let's take a few deep breaths. Let's practice some of that self compassion here.
Yes. And I think emotions are great in the messengers too. I understand that a lot of times in hindsight, we can understand our inner dialogue. So in the moment, I do think, again, practicing mindfulness and noticing any physical sensations in you, or like, are you feeling some pressure around your head? Are you feeling any chest tightness? So people can also lean into their physical sensations and emotions to alarm them that they are they are not being as centered as grounded as they can be.
Right. Yes, that's such a good point. Often our bodies tell us before our mind clues in.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Okay. So much good stuff there on perfectionism. And then tell us about Perfectionism University, the online platform that you created.
I would love to. So I launched that website last year in 2021, and it's called perfectionismuniversity.com. And I wanted to launch this course because, just to share a little bit about, like, California as a licensed therapist, so I can only work with people who are residents of California.
Right.
So I wanted to have an opportunity where I could connect with anybody around the world. I wanted to understand perfectionism. So that's how this website came to life. And it's called Perfectionism University because I wanted a place to unlearn perfectionism, and I wanted to create a community. I want people to know, again, when we talk about we're not alone, I hope that the platform where people can come together, I do have a quiz there. If people are interested, they can go to the website and take a very short quiz that walks them through 15 different signs of perfectionism, and you get to see how much perfectionism is showing up in your life.
Wow. Oh, that sounds so cool. So you don't have to go through all 15,
Yes.
but what are some of the things that maybe would be on that quiz or that you look for?
Yes, because I think one of the things that I would maybe add to our conversation is, like, earlier you were mentioning how perfectionism shows up in people who are high functioning overachievers and very ambitious people. So again, typically people think perfectionists are type A, or perfectionists are the CEO, or
Right.
the people who hold high positions. And there's actually completely different versions of perfectionism that I think we're starting to talk more about, which is people who procrastinate. So
Mm-hmm.
those with um, indecisiveness, delaying decisions, not getting started, not being goal oriented, again, having time management problems, and procrastinating as a result, having that analysis paralysis. Those types of symptoms are also stem from perfectionism. And if I could just quickly give the definition, is because the underlying expectations they have of themselves get so heavy that they literally get paralyzed by them. And the dialogue tends to be is, I will wait till I can do it perfectly. I will wait till it's the perfect time, the right time, and I will wait until it will look the way I want it to look. So there's this constant procrastination. And then, another common dialogue is, well, it's never going to be good enough, so why bother?
Right. Why even start?
Why even start? So we see a lot of procrastination, delaying decisions, seeking approval and reassurance from other people. So if you're the type of person that triple check your work and you're always kind of behind in submitting things, or you stay up all night because you just keep thinking, like, well, I'm sure one more typo I can fix, or one more research I can reference to. So if you find yourself working on things longer than they need to be, it might be a symptom of your perfectionism. So the quiz also talks about these, again, what I call lesser known symptoms of perfectionism. Right.
So I see so much of that. That's such a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So then you see that, and what do you do? Like, how do you work with someone presenting that way, with struggling with perfectionism?
It does come back to, obviously, commitment, right? We have to make a commitment. We have to have our enough is enough moment where we say we're going to make different choices. So there's no kind of shortcut to this. along with that, I think going back to mindset and new thoughts, like it's okay to feel this way, I'm not alone in my suffering. For the procrastination person who procrastinates or indecisive, my to-go phrase is progress over perfection.
Yes. Yes.
Any progress, or another phrase I love to say is something is better than nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I saw that with people who are in recovery, struggling with addiction, when they're in their early phases of recovery, they are very overwhelmed. And along with that, I imagine a bit disappointed, but discouraged of where to pick their lives back up, because they've been lost in their addiction for so long. They don't know their credit score. They don't have any penny in the bank under their name, or they've lost a lot of money. So there's a lot of paralysis that happens when we just don't know where to begin. So I always tell my clients, again, as a behavioral part of me is like, something is better than nothing. And
yes,
is there one step you can take today? Obviously, then some other simple basic tools: make schedules, create an order of things, use alarms on your phone to remind you certain things that you want to do, use calendar, visual prompts.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so good. And it's so practical. Like it's so personal for the individual, but it's so practical too, because it can feel like this is daunting, or what's the point? Well, I've always been this way, I'll never change. But those are really practical things. Like throughout today's show, like you've shared some really good just questions or strategies to ask yourself. Even those mottos, I think those are so handy. I write them on sticky notes around my house of, progress over perfection, or be present over perfect, those types of things. So if there's any, I want to encourage you listeners today, if there's any ones that really resonate with you, like go back, listen, but pick one, or find a different one and write it on where you're going to see it, like that visual prompt. That can be so powerful.
It really is, because the way I also try to normalize that type of use of visual prompts for my clients is that we have to accept that right now there is that, brain wiring where your brain is accustomed to, or has become accustomed to, think a certain way. So we need external reminders to combat your daily automatic thoughts. So if you put just reminders around you, it's kind of like a cue for your brain to read that phrase to say, my best is enough, and I can do this. I accept myself. I love myself, whatever it is. And we know from the research on brain's neuroplasticity, with repetition, your brain will change the way it thinks, and different neural connection will take place. So those visual prompts, those post-it notes, or screensavers on your phone are just cues to change the way your brain is communicating.
Yeah. And they seem small, but they're really mighty. And yeah, the brain's like a muscle. It's muscle memory. Just like with any other muscle, like if I want to get stronger in my leg strength and do some squats, once a week for an hour, it's not going to do much. I'm just going to be really sore the next day. But if I incorporate it into my lifestyle a few times a week, even 5 minutes a day, 3 times a week, you look back over time, 6 weeks, 3 months, you're going to see a lot of progress with that muscle memory and that repetition. Same thing with the brain. And I think that's really encouraging, because it can be so easy to say, oh, that doesn't work, or yeah, what's that going to do? But really, neuroplasticity, like you said, we know that the brain can change. And it's actually such a hope-filled research finding that we can actually change our way of thinking, behaving, feeling, and really change our lives, which is huge.
Yes, yes. My yoga teacher was actually saying this really funny thing the other day. She said, this was reference to the body, but I think we can apply to the brain, where she said, like, your mind, let's say your negative thinking is not like Amazon Prime. It won't change in 2 days. It won't arrive in 2 days. So it's going to take a lot of practice. And along with that, I think it is important to remind people to track their progress, because I know it can get very easy to get lost in the responsibilities of our days and really forget what we have to do. For example, I use, again, it's not a commercial, but I use Headspace for meditation. And I make sure I do it every night. So if you want to do something, I think you should really not wing it and make sure there's a time in the day that you are practicing certain
Right.
skills. And if you wanted to, again, use a journal or use a phone app, have it tracking it is really a big accountability. Because
Right.
I can see my meditation numbers like, okay, you've been meditating for 50 days, you've been meditating for 100 days. I think we do need those reminders to also keep it consistent.
Right. Oh, I love that. I know in Canada, one that I really recommend is called Mind Shift. It's a cognitive behavioral therapy app for anxiety, CBT based. I know in the States there's Sanvelo or Wobot. Are there any certain, I mean, Calm, Headspace, those sort of things? What are your go-to, resources that you recommend to people?
So in terms of meditation, definitely Headspace and
Yeah.
Calm. And then for maybe more personal, the discussion on perfectionism, I do think that the books we talked about are my to go. I love books.
Me too.
Uh,
Me too. I have a huge library and yeah.
it is. And another one I would recommend that I loved reading was the title of the book is called Brave, Not Perfect.
Oh,
And you can tell why I was drawn to that book. And the
yes.
author
Yeah.
is, I hope I'm going to do it justice, Rejma Sajani.
Ooh.
So I apologize if I mispronounce it. Again, the title of the book is Brave, Not Perfect.
Well, Dr. Menije, where can our listeners find you?
Definitely the website will be a good place to connect with me if they want to take the quiz and they could be part of the email list. I send emails every Thursdays. Again, the website is perfectionismuniversity.com. But I do know sometimes social media can be an easier way of connecting with people. So if people want to meet me and say hi to me over at Instagram, that's where I hang out the most. And the handle is Dr. Menije, so dr.menije. So Instagram will be probably the easiest way to connect with me.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm going to go. I want to do that quiz. What a great resource. I mean, I'm going to utilize that too for my clients. I think that's so great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for creating something like that. I love how your passion is turned into this and helping so many people through it.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope, yes, I hope it will help people. And again, it's just a journey of loving ourselves one day at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, I read about you and I thought, oh, we could talk about so many things, OCD, addictions work, perfectionism. And it's just such a hot topic. If you come back on, we would love to have you back on to talk on OCD or addictions or anything else. You are just an absolute delight. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me here. It was such an honor and a pleasure to meet you and be part of the podcast.